I think the world has simply been running way over its capacity. And the great luxury of the last 200 years of fossil fuels, coal and then oil and gas, have catapulted us far above our long-term ability to sustain. And the good news is it catapulted science and research as well as income and consumption. We're going to have to rely enormously on research and our inventiveness to save our bacon. And I do believe there is a decent chance that it will. Quite a number of years ago, I got into studying the rise and fall of civilizations. And I always like to recommend Immoderate Greatness by Ophuls, O-P-H-U-L-S. He's done all the heavy lifting for us. He's, in a series of chapters, condensed all the major reasons for civilizations failing in the past. And he's read everything. He knows it like the back of his hand. And it's like the Cliff Notes, very, very serious, well-written, quotable Cliff Notes on civilizations failing. And he gives 5 or 6 major reasons, which include overburdening the local environment, your soil, and your nature, and your water. Complexity, which is very energy intensive, and so on. And he concludes 2 things. One, that the current global civilization checks off every single one of them, which is rather creepy. And 2, that humans appear to be hardwired to self-destruct. And my take on that is that, like every other organism, we've spent a few million years fighting for survival, and we have learned to grab what we can when we can. And like other organisms, to grow, we propagate basically as much as we can for our first few million years. And we'll expand to fill the space available. We are not programmed to think about long-term, slow-moving consequences. And so we don't. And we have to look at things today like the president of Brazil encouraging the greatest deforestation in Brazil's history in the last 12 months, to everybody's shock. But we also have to live in a world where President Trump was doing his best to undo all the good that EPA and environmental movements had been trying to do. It's pretty bizarre to have a couple of serious countries attempting to ignore the greatest threat, perhaps for hundreds of years. I believe that we do have some escape clauses from Mr. Ophuls' prediction of self-destruction. And that is twofold. One, unexpected by everybody, including Malthus in 1798, we are choosing, despite getting wealthier, we are choosing to have fewer children since 1961. It's a remarkably unexpected outcome. It was not predicted, as far as I'm aware, by anybody, let's say as recently as 1950. And the degree and the speed with which fertility rates are contracting is not really appreciated by anybody, including the financial community. We are not only way down from replacement rate in every developed country except Israel, but we are, if anything, accelerating. And so in the US, we're at 1.65 versus 2.1 children. We're at 1.65. And so way down, a quarter below what is necessary. And many countries in Europe, Italy, Hungary, are way below that. And of course, in the Far East, you culminate in South Korea, which has incidentally overtaken Japan in individual wealth, individual income, I should say. They have a fertility rate below 1. I mean, it's just inconceivable. And China, Japan, Taiwan are all down there at the 1.5 level. quite remarkable. And this is not a sufficient condition to save our bacon, but it is a very necessary condition. When we're selling our resource portfolio, we have a wonderful exhibit that looks at the correlation between all the major sectors, utilities, consumption, and so on, consumer goods. And there's only one where, as the time period lengthens, the correlation drops, and that is resources. And resources drops to such good effect that based on the last 80 years of data, every rolling 10-year period, that the 10-year correlation is negative. So if you believe in inflation, you know that resources do very well. You also know that in the long run, it's strongly negative. It's negatively correlated, modestly, with the rest of the portfolio. As we're seeing today, when they do well, it puts a burden on the rest of the economy and they do bad. So there is a very strong case here for a resource portfolio. On resources, just a point that the last time we had a super bubble in commodities, there were very large new mines waiting to come online. What has happened since the 2011 crunch, when China slowed down in its heavy industrializing, and the growth rate for iron ore and coal dropped from double digit to zero, dead flat for 3 years in a row, breaking the back of the resource industry. They have not done any capex. It takes 5 to 15 years to bring on a mine. They have not been doing this. There are no great reserves of lithium, cobalt, copper, nickel, even iron ore to come online this time. And everybody knows it. If you look at the need for these, particularly green metals, greening metals, it doesn't compute. There are no backup resources. And that applies right across the length and breadth of resources. They have not been capexing, even in oil and gas, for the last 10 years, to a remarkable degree. The other factor is the speed of our science, and the fact that, if anything, it seems to be maybe accelerating. And we do have some getting out of jail free cards, thank heavens. The problems we face basically are all the cures so far have been contained within a finite world. We're trying to compound on a finite planet. But the get out of jail free cards have a whiff of the infinite. And they are fusion, a source of infinite energy if we can pull it off. It's green, we never run out, and it may be cheap. It remains to be seen. I'm reasonably optimistic, but it's certainly far from a probability of 1. Geothermal, the ability to drill several miles down and tap the heat of the inner core, which is more, for all intents and purposes, infinite and green. And we have a vast learning curve from fracking to tap into. But there are massive problems of dealing with the heat several miles down, but not necessarily problems that we won't learn to handle. And the third one is a major breakthrough in energy storage to go with the spectacular progress of solar and wind. Again, year after year has outperformed early forecasts. If you look at the international energy authorities and others, you will see an almost laughable pattern where each forecast for 2030 has been below the actual. Each year it's ramping up. It's like an investment model that never learns from the past, it seems. But if we can take the cost of energy storage down to 10 cents or 20 cents on the dollar from today, and blend it and mix it with solar and wind, that will also be basically an infinite source of green energy. So I like to say, in all probability, the lack of cheap available green energy is not the factor that will bring us to our knees. The problem is the time it will take to get there. We have wasted arguably 50 years getting the point that climate change is ultimately dangerous. And by the time we have all this cheap green energy, an enormous amount of damage will have been done. And the parts per million in the atmosphere will have gone from what we need, which is about 280 to 300, where you get a very stable world. It's currently 420, and it is on its way for sure beyond 500. This is the kind of burden that we will have to deal with. And if we have fusion or one of the others, we will be able to set about the slow, steady business of subtracting carbon dioxide and returning the planet to a decent state. So if we have that and we combine with a declining population, we really do have a chance of survival. As I like to say, we are, thank heavens, a very inventive species. And our foundation for the protection of the environment has a target of 50% green venture capital and 25% other early stage venture capital. The world is getting behind the need to green the economy, getting behind the need to be frugal with resources and change and improve the food structure. The governments are getting behind it, corporations are getting behind it. Why would early stage new enterprises in those areas not be a candidate for highest return on the planet? I think they are. And it's thoroughly exciting. It gives a sense of purpose, and it may very well be the best investment you can make. The top line revenue of people going to solve climate change is going to dwarf the rest of the economy. It's the top line of electric vehicles versus the top line of the old vehicles, the top line of electricity versus fossil fuels, the top line of efficiency versus business as usual.